Aho, young warriors. I'm comedian, TV writer, Cowlitz Indian Tribal member, and spicy as a bag of hot chips, Joey Clift. And we're here at the Urban Native Era Warehouse on the lands of the San Gabrielino Tongva people to talk about Native comedy and all things FX's Reservation Dogs Season 2. Created by Sterlin, Harjo, and Taika Waititi, FX's Reservation Dogs returns on August 3rd, only on Hulu, and we've got a panel of Native comedians and TV writers who are here to help me dig in like a fresh meat pie. First, she's toured the country with her all-Native stand-up troupe, Three Sisters Comedy, and she appears on Season 2 of FX's Reservation Dogs from the Kiowa and Apache tribes of Oklahoma, Adrianne Chalepah. Next, you see him on The World Stands Up and the American Indian Comedy Slam from the Ojibwe tribe, Jim Ruel. And she's a TV writer and vice chair of the Native American Indigenous Writers Committee at the WGA from the Oglala Lakota Tribe, Aiko Little. FX's Reservation Dogs is one of the first TV shows created, written by, and starring Native people. Some folks watching might not know a ton about Native comedy, so let's just jump right into it. What is Native comedy?
So the way I look at it is Native comedy or Native humor, however way you want to term it. I look at it as like the original love language for us. It's very sacred. You know, we always joke like, oh, laughter is the best medicine, you know, our humor is very sacred, but like, it's true. You know, you have tribes where one of the greatest celebrations that you have is a child's first laugh. And in that, it's something that's so beautiful because that is the little one's first time really just using their voice on their own.
And maybe there's something to it culturally that our cultures aren't really hierarchical, and some are, like European cultures tend to be very hierarchical. So in comedy, it's like, are you punching up to power? Are you punching down and kind of like being a bully? And in Native communities where we're taught not to put people on pedestals, and our punches come from every direction, so you gotta watch out.
Oh yeah, I've been roasted by the youngest kid to the oldest elder, so trust me, roasting comes from all directions.
Have you ever been roasted?
Oh my gosh, all the time. And like, I think the last time, because I very much enjoy getting dolled up and everything, and I got like this beautiful like buffalo print bag my auntie made me, and I showed up to an event all like cute and glam, and the medicine man there, he looked at me and I knew he was gonna say something. And he was like, oh, that's a nice bag. I'm like, oh, thank you. And I thought that was it, but I was like,
It's never
it. And he was like, I'll give you $1. I'm like, only $1? But, you know.
It's always followed by like an A, or like the reservation I grew up on, it was like ace, and you know, it's just things that it's just like punctuating it with a sound that shows like, oh, I'm just like messing with you.
Yeah, it could be in like an A, so that they know they're announcing to you, I'm just kidding, you know, don't take it serious, I'm just kidding. And also I think when we as Indigenous people, when we are roasting you, it's like, I see you, I'm acknowledging you. It's when we're really quiet and refuse to even say anything to you and don't joke with you that I think you should be worried.
The world of FX's Reservation Dogs has so many funny characters. Here's a scene featuring one of my favorites.
Back in my day, we all had a job. We all had a role, each a stitch in the great loincloth of the people.
I don't even know what that means, man.
I don't even know what it means, man. I'm just making it up as I go along.
Dallas Goldtooth is so funny, and I think it's so cool to take a character that subverts the stereotype that exists of like the native spirit guide that we've seen in a lot of TV shows and movies. Aiko, who are some of your favorite characters from FX's Reservation Dogs?
Paulina Alexis as Willie Jack, like such phenomenal work that she does. The writing itself, like it's not necessarily simple, but it is very precious. It's like sparse, but just enough that, you know, Paulina is able to like get that authenticity, get the real humor out of it, and just like in the most candid way possible. And everything that she does, like with the writing and the jokes, like, I don't know, I can't take my eyes off of her. Like, she's amazing.
It's also, she's just so like specifically res without being, like, without putting it on. Like, I buy that actor is like that.
Yes, and like another thing about Paulina and just like Willie Jack in general is the representation that we see, you know, having a Native woman who's not hypersexualized and isn't super femme, like, you know, it's just so, it's like I'm seeing my cousin or I'm seeing my auntie on screen, and that's just so beautiful.
I really love Uncle Brownie's character because I have a relative that almost looks exactly and acts exactly like that and lives in the woods. And like, I always joke about this relative being Bigfoot, like just being the actual Bigfoot because of the isolation and the everything about them. And so, yeah, I think we're also just really obsessed with Bigfoot in Indian country. So this is like some of these
Oh yeah, I grew up in Washington. We're for sure obsessed with Bigfoot. I mean, the mascot of the NBA Seattle basketball team was Squatch, you know?
Yeah, we should adopt Bigfoot like as a
Bigfoot's
tribal
native.
member.
Isn't he an uncle?
I feel like Bigfoot's an uncle.
He's an uncle, like
Scary uncle.
very sacred in his own way.
Being there kind of more my generation, seeing Wes Studi and Zahn McLaren both take on roles that are more comedic, where a lot of times they're forced to play the most, very stoic and serious characters, and these ones they're not, And the scene when they're facing off over the copper in the pickup truck, and Bucky's trying to talk his way out of it, and he's like sits in the passenger side. I just had a ride and just took off, and that was just totally like I know like native hucksters where I'm like, I am not playing poker with you. You're too good at this. And the way Big is just kind of going at it in his own way, his own kind of goofy way, and I love the interactions of those two. I'm like, gosh, this could be a show in itself.
And actually, a specific story I wanted to shout out. Reservation Dogs has a lot of focus on native in-jokes and native comedy, but they also draw a lot of inspiration from like native lore that we've heard from elders growing up. And one of my favorites is in this clip that we're gonna check out right now.
I'll take you there. Jump in.
Well, all right.
Yeah, fuck yeah, I got nothing else going on. Getting this chick Magna ride, baby.
Be a gentleman, will you?
Yes, ma'am. Next stop, Carnegie, Oklahoma.
My reaction seeing her on screen, it was like a guttural scream, just because one, I heard Dear Lady legends growing up from elders, in the reservation I grew up on. So I knew, what she meant, and that this guy that she was getting in the car with was probably gonna get trampled to death. But in addition to that, I just didn't think it was possible to put Dear Lady on TV, because I just never seen like native lore put on TV in that way.
Well, I love that scene. It took me by surprise because when we first see Dear Lady, because she leans over and she says she's heading to Carnegie. And for those that don't know, Carnegie is the tribal headquarters of the Kiowa tribe. And so she's heading to my home community. And Dear Lady is really big where I'm from, like to the point when I was growing up, all the young girls were like, oh, let me just rest my hooves, or
Yeah, I hear like aunties say that all the time.
like my hooves hurt, my hooves are aching, and like, ew, I need to go get my hooves taken care of. Like, we identify with Dear Lady because, I mean, growing up, Dear Lady was never something I personally feared, because I was like, she's not after me. So I don't know, I never feared that entity, but at the same time, I understand like the creepiness of it all, and like it brought my childhood full circle, and I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that this one character was had such a big impact on Indian country, and how cool that she was from Carnegie.
I mentioned earlier that the show's historic. It's one of the first native created TV shows on TV right now, and I'm really loving seeing the positive reaction that this is causing in our communities of like native kids who are seeing themselves on screen and feeling like they can create comedy and content that they maybe couldn't before. Like my personal story is that I didn't know that I didn't see any native comedians on TV, so I didn't know I was allowed to work in comedy. So instead I went to school to be like a small market TV weather guy or something. And seeing a lot of native kids and native youths and native folks on reservations inspired by Reservation Dogs, and then becoming podcasters, content creators, putting their own social media channels together, is just so cool to see. I guess, what are some positive effects that y'all have seen from Reservation Dogs, just in your communities and in communities that you've been in?
It has created more native pride in Oklahoma, and when I was growing up, I didn't see a lot of that, except like at boarding school or in Anadarko, where I'm from. It's a very heavily populated native town. but like it was when you go outside of these little res bubbles, you see people who are trying not to be Native, who are trying their best to sort of erase their nativeness. And I see people that I grew up with embracing their nativeness, whereas like in middle school I was like, what? Like, you know, it's changing the culture of being Native in Oklahoma to a good thing.
Growing up in San Francisco, for a lot of the Native youth, they really weren't able to see themselves in anything. I think the only time that we brought up we're Native, you know, people would usually meet it with such negativity. But with the show, like, the show, even though it is like, it's Reservation Dogs, it's about the res, and it's res characters and res writers and like everything, like, it is so beautiful to see the community of San Francisco be like, I still can identify with that. Like, I really support res natives, and I like seeing little ones, like my little brother, you know, he watched the show and he was like, I want to be a writer now. Like, I want to tell my story too.
That's like,
and it's
that's
so
dope.
beautiful, but yeah.
We've talked a lot about the positive effects of Native representation on the youth, but something I want to talk about is the positive effects on the elders in our communities. Like Jim, you performed with some really great Native comedy legends. You know, Charlie Hill is a big name who's just a legend in Native stand-up. How do you think that Charlie and people of his generation who were elders in Native comedy would feel about shows like FX's Reservation Dogs, really bringing Native comedy to the mainstream?
Yeah, he was kind of a hater. He'd have been pretty jealous. I wish he was here to see it because I know he would have loved it. And you know, he was always sharing stories and about doing stand-up and stuff, like starting in the 70s and the 80s, and it was just kind of painful to me because I knew he was alone. And now there's a lot of us doing Native stand-up and we get to perform together. And he didn't for most of his career. He didn't get to perform with many Native. He did perform with other Natives. He was performing out with Floyd Westerman, and there was, of course, the Indian and the white guy. But also, he was a lie. I mean, stand-up can be really lonely on the road, and being a Native, it can be even more so working the comedy club circuit.
Well, I know that when I told my elders, my family back home, that I was going to be in this next season of Reservation Dogs, they were more excited about that than when I told them I was graduating with my master's. Like, it happened at the same time, and they were like, oh, that's cool, you're getting your master's. Well, tell us about Reservation Dogs. And so, yes, the elders are amped. They're pretty happy.
That's amazing. Thanks so much to our panel of Native writers and comedians, and to Nerdist and FX for bringing us together to talk all things FX's Reservation Dogs and Native comedy. And thanks again to Sterlin, Harjo, and Taika Waititi for creating a funny, poignant, and unapologetically Native show for us to talk about. We have an all-Native comedy panel and a ton of Native people on the crew working behind the scenes who all came together to hang out in the warehouse of a dope Native-owned fashion brand to talk about one of the first Native-created TV shows in history. I could not be happier that we got to do this, and a big thanks and a million props to everybody who helped make it happen. Be sure to keep the Native comedy party going when FX's Reservation Dogs returns August 3rd, only on Hulu. Bye! Ace.